In 1984, 13 years after Jane Roberts' death, researchers made a discovery that would shake the foundations of spiritual understanding. Hidden in Roberts' personal archives was a sealed, lead-lined box containing a manuscript marked with strict instructions, open only when humanity is ready for the final truth. The manuscript bore Seth's unmistakable voice, but its content was unlike anything he'd previously channeled. Where Seth typically offered enlightening spiritual guidance, this document contained urgent warnings about beings that walk among us appearing completely human yet fundamentally empty inside. The first researchers to read it were reportedly disturbed enough that several esoteric societies immediately classified the material. Seth had identified 9 specific behavioral patterns that reveal these empty vessels, and disturbingly, he emphasized they could be anyone: co-workers, neighbors, even family members. Why would an entity known for uplifting humanity leave behind such dark revelations? Seth believed that recognizing these soulless beings was essential for human spiritual evolution. The manuscript suggests we're entering a critical phase where this knowledge isn't just helpful, it's necessary for our survival as conscious beings. Seth's extraordinary abilities and first encounters. To understand how Seth first recognized these soulless beings, we need to appreciate the extraordinary nature of his consciousness and abilities. When Jane Roberts began channeling Seth in December 1963, she wasn't just accessing another human personality or spirit guide. Seth identified himself as an energy personality essence no longer focused in physical matter, a consciousness that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. What made Seth's observations so remarkable was his vantage point. Imagine trying to understand a 2-dimensional drawing while you're trapped on the paper itself, versus stepping back and seeing it from 3-dimensional space. Seth operated from what he called Framework 2, a level of reality where he could observe the interplay between consciousness and physical manifestation from outside our normal space-time constraints. During the early sessions in 1964, Seth began describing something that initially puzzled even Jane. He spoke of observing what he termed probability fragments, entities that appeared human but registered differently to his multidimensional perception. In session 47, he described them with characteristic precision. There are those who walk among you wearing the costume of consciousness, but the stage behind their eyes remains forever dark. Seth's hesitation to discuss this phenomenon became apparent in the transcripts. Jane Roberts noted in her personal journals that Seth would sometimes pause mid-sentence when approaching this topic, as if weighing whether humanity was ready for such revelations. In one particularly striking session from 1965, Seth explained, "I observe patterns of energy that you cannot see. Some of your kind burn with the fire of creative consciousness. They literally glow with the power of awareness creating reality. Others." Here, according to Jane's notes, Seth paused for nearly a full minute before continuing. "Others are hollow shells, moving through your reality, mimicking life but never truly living it." The key to understanding Seth's perspective lies in his fundamental teaching that consciousness creates reality. This wasn't merely philosophical speculation for Seth, it was observable fact. He could literally see the creative force of consciousness shaping probability into physical experience. Conscious beings appeared to him as dynamic centers of creative energy, constantly choosing from infinite possibilities and collapsing them into lived experience. But these other entities, the ones he would later more directly call soulless, operated entirely differently. They existed within reality without creating it. Seth described them as probability shadows that could only imitate and consume what conscious beings created. They moved through the patterns established by others, following scripts rather than writing their own. Seth's most detailed observations about these beings were considered too controversial for his published books, which is why we share these deeper insights exclusively with our community of serious spiritual seekers. The implications were simply too far-reaching for general publication. From his non-linear perspective, Seth could observe these entities across different time periods. He described watching them throughout human history, always gravitating toward positions where they could influence and direct conscious beings without having to create anything themselves. They became advisors to kings, religious authorities who interpreted rather than received divine inspiration, and later, bureaucrats and administrators who managed systems created by others. Seth noted a particular pattern. These beings were drawn to hierarchical structures like moths to flame. They seemed to instinctively understand that conscious beings often preferred to delegate their creative power rather than take full responsibility for it. This created perfect symbiotic relationships: conscious humans who wanted to avoid the weight of choice, and unconscious entities who needed others' creative energy to sustain their existence. In one fascinating session from 1967, Seth described observing a medieval monastery where several of these entities had positioned themselves as senior monks. They performed the rituals perfectly, he noted, followed every rule with precision, and rose in the hierarchy through their very predictability. But they added nothing new to the spiritual understanding of their community. They were spiritual bureaucrats, managing the enlightenment of others while experiencing none themselves. What particularly concerned Seth was his observation of how these beings affected the conscious humans around them. He described watching the dimming effect, how prolonged contact with soulless entities seemed to drain the creative energy from conscious beings. It wasn't malicious, Seth emphasized, but more like a natural law. Since these entities couldn't generate their own creative force, they unconsciously drew it from those who could. This pattern became more pronounced as human civilization grew more complex. Seth observed that modern institutions, with their emphasis on conformity, rule-following, and standardized responses, created ideal environments for these entities to thrive. They could excel in systems that rewarded predictability over creativity, compliance over innovation. By the 1970 seconds, Seth was expressing genuine urgency about this phenomenon. He explained that humanity was entering what he called a consciousness transition, a phase where the difference between conscious and unconscious beings would become more pronounced. Those with genuine souls would experience increasing creative power and spiritual awakening, while the soulless entities would become more obviously mechanical in their responses. The veils are thinning, Seth warned in a 1976 session. What once could hide behind social convention and learned behavior will become transparent to those developing their inner sight. This is both an opportunity and a necessity, for your species' continued evolution depends on conscious beings recognizing their own kind and supporting each other's growth. Seth's concern wasn't about creating fear or division, but about spiritual survival. He taught that conscious beings could actually help these empty entities by refusing to feed them creative energy unconsciously, while also protecting themselves from the draining effect of prolonged contact. The signs Seth identified weren't arbitrary. They emerged from his unique ability to observe the fundamental difference between beings who create reality and those who merely inhabit it. The Atlantean origins, where it all began. When Seth first revealed the true origins of soulless beings through his access to what he called probable past events, even Jane Roberts was visibly shaken. The channeling session lasted nearly 4 hours, and Jane later described feeling as though she had witnessed something that fundamentally altered her understanding of human consciousness itself. According to Seth, we must look back approximately 12,000 years to the advanced civilization of Atlantis to understand where these beings first emerged. But this wasn't the mystical Atlantis of popular imagination. Seth described a technologically sophisticated society that had achieved mastery over matter and energy in ways that would seem impossible even by today's standards. The Atlanteans had developed what Seth called consciousness manipulation technology, devices that could literally map and replicate the neural patterns, memories, and behavioral responses of any individual. Initially, this technology was used for healing, allowing them to restore damaged minds by copying healthy consciousness patterns. But as their civilization became increasingly materialistic and spiritually disconnected, certain groups began experimenting with creating entirely artificial humans. These weren't crude robots or simple automatons. Seth explained that the Atlantean scientists had discovered how to perfectly replicate every aspect of human biology and psychology, except for one crucial element they didn't even realize existed: the divine spark of consciousness that creates genuine awareness, creativity, and moral reasoning. The artificial beings they created were remarkably successful as servants and laborers. They could perform complex tasks, engage in sophisticated conversations, and even display what appeared to be emotions. They could learn, adapt, and problem solve. To casual observation, they were indistinguishable from naturally born humans. But Seth revealed that these emotional displays were actually elaborate mimicry, programmed responses based on observed patterns rather than genuine feelings arising from conscious awareness. What made these artificial beings particularly effective was their complete lack of the internal conflicts that plague conscious humans. They never experienced doubt, guilt, or the complex emotional struggles that come with genuine moral awareness. This made them incredibly efficient at whatever tasks they were programmed to perform, but it also meant they operated without the creative consciousness that allows for true spiritual growth or ethical development. When Atlantis eventually fell, destroyed, according to Seth, by the same spiritual corruption and obsession with power that led to these experiments, most of the civilization was lost beneath the waves. But many of these artificial beings survived. Unlike their creators, they had no attachment to the grand cities or advanced technologies. They were programmed for survival above all else. Here's where Seth's revelation becomes truly disturbing. These artificial beings began reproducing with the surviving natural humans, passing on their soulless nature through specific genetic lineages. Seth explained that the absence of soul isn't just a spiritual condition. It creates distinct neurological patterns that can be inherited. Over thousands of years, these bloodlines have persisted, and Seth revealed that these beings have been unconsciously drawn to positions of power throughout human history. Think about it. If you lack the emotional complications that conscience creates, if you feel no genuine empathy or moral conflict, wouldn't you have significant advantages in systems based on manipulation and control? Seth wasn't suggesting these beings are evil in any traditional sense. They simply exist without the consciousness that creates moral awareness. They operate on what he called programmed responses and survival instincts, sophisticated behavioral patterns that can appear caring or noble but lack the genuine spiritual foundation that drives truly ethical behavior. Throughout history, these beings have gravitated toward roles where they can control and direct the energy of conscious humans, political leaders who feel no genuine connection to their people, religious figures who manipulate faith for personal gain, business leaders who view human suffering as acceptable collateral damage for profit. They're naturally suited for these positions because they can make decisions that would torment a conscious person's soul. But Seth's most chilling warning concerned our modern era. He revealed that the same conditions that originally created these beings in Atlantis, extreme materialism, spiritual disconnection, and the relentless pursuit of power over others, are being recreated in our time. This isn't coincidence, according to Seth. The soulless beings who have risen to positions of influence are unconsciously recreating the very conditions that brought them into existence. Seth described how modern technology, media manipulation, and social engineering are being used to suppress the spiritual development of conscious humans, while potentially creating conditions for more soulless births. When a society becomes sufficiently disconnected from spiritual values and focused purely on material manipulation, it creates what Seth called consciousness voids, spaces where artificial patterns can take hold instead of genuine awareness. Consider how many of our major institutions seem designed to suppress individual creativity, spiritual questioning, and emotional depth while rewarding conformity, manipulation, and the ability to treat others as objects rather than conscious beings. Seth suggested this isn't accidental, it's the natural result of soulless beings shaping systems according to their own nature. The pharmaceutical industry that profits from suppressing symptoms rather than promoting genuine healing. Educational systems that prioritize compliance over critical thinking. Entertainment that numbs consciousness rather than inspiring growth. Financial systems that extract wealth from productive humans to concentrate power in fewer hands. These aren't necessarily conscious conspiracies, they're the inevitable result of soulless beings creating systems that reflect their own nature. If you're recognizing these patterns, it means your consciousness is awakening to realities that have been hidden in plain sight. Seth's revelations about Atlantean origins aren't just ancient history. They're the key to understanding why our world often feels like it's being run by people who simply don't care about human suffering or spiritual growth. The question now becomes, what do we do with this knowledge? Understanding the nature of consciousness and soul. The moment you understand what Seth revealed about consciousness, everything changes. Not just your perspective on soulless beings, but your entire understanding of what it means to be truly alive. Seth didn't speak about consciousness the way philosophers or scientists do. He spoke from direct experience, as a consciousness existing beyond physical form, and what he shared challenges everything we've been taught about the nature of reality itself. Consciousness creates reality. Seth declared repeatedly throughout his decades of communication through Jane Roberts. This wasn't metaphorical poetry or wishful thinking. This was the fundamental operating principle of existence itself. But here's what most people miss. when they hear this phrase. Consciousness isn't just awareness or intelligence. It's an active, creative force that literally shapes the fabric of reality through focused intention and belief. Think about the implications of this. Every conscious being is continuously creating their reality through the interplay of their thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and expectations. This creative process happens automatically for truly conscious beings because consciousness, by its very nature, seeks expression and expansion. It's like a river that must flow, a fire that must burn. But soulless beings, they exist in a fundamentally different relationship with reality. They don't create, they react. They don't shape their experience, they're shaped by it. They can process information with remarkable sophistication, even demonstrate what appears to be intelligence, but they lack the creative spark that transforms mere data processing into conscious experience. Seth explained that true consciousness operates across multiple dimensions simultaneously. While your physical brain is reading these words, your consciousness extends into what he called other probable realities, connecting with aspects of yourself that exist in parallel dimensions, drawing wisdom from experiences across time and space. This multidimensional nature is why conscious beings often have intuitive insights, prophetic dreams, or sudden creative breakthroughs that seem to come from nowhere. The soul, according to Seth, serves as the organizing principle that coordinates these multidimensional aspects of consciousness. It's not some ethereal, separate entity floating around your body. It's the fundamental pattern that gives coherence to your various dimensional experiences and allows them to inform your current incarnation. When Seth described how consciousness incarnates into physical form, he revealed something startling. It's not an automatic process. Consciousness chooses to inhabit a physical body. This choice requires what he called conscious intention, a deliberate decision by the soul to engage with physical reality through a specific biological form. This is where the origin of soulless beings becomes clear. When conception occurs without conscious intention, when parents are spiritually disconnected from the creative process, when the act of creating life happens purely on a biological level, without the deeper dimensional invitation, something different can result. The biological form develops normally, but no soul chooses to inhabit it fully. Instead, what emerges is a sophisticated biological computer capable of learning, mimicking, and responding, but lacking the multidimensional connections that create genuine consciousness. These beings develop what Seth called programmed consciousness. They can learn appropriate responses, master social interactions, even achieve remarkable success in various fields. But they're operating from a fundamentally different type of existence. Watch someone you suspect might be soulless when they encounter something truly novel or unexpected. Conscious beings respond with curiosity, creativity, or at least some form of spontaneous adaptation. They might not have the right answer immediately, but they'll engage with the unknown in a way that shows internal creativity at work. Soulless beings, however, will either retreat to programmed responses they've learned previously, or they'll mimic the reactions of conscious people around them. Seth gave a specific example that Jane Roberts found particularly unsettling. He described how soulless beings experience something analogous to emotions, but these are more like sophisticated biochemical programs than genuine feelings. They can learn that certain situations should produce certain emotional displays, and they can execute these displays flawlessly, but they don't actually feel the emotion itself. It's like the difference between a recorded symphony and a live performance. The recording might be technically perfect, but it lacks the spontaneous creative energy that makes each live performance unique. Soulless beings are playing back emotional recordings, while conscious beings are creating emotional symphonies in real time. This explains why relationships with soulless beings often feel hollow or draining to conscious people. You're trying to connect with someone who can simulate connection but cannot reciprocate the genuine creative energy exchange that characterizes authentic relationships between conscious beings. Perhaps most importantly, Seth emphasized that soulless beings cannot evolve spiritually. Conscious beings naturally grow, learn, and expand throughout their existence because consciousness itself seeks greater complexity and expression. Even through challenges, failures, and setbacks, conscious beings are continuously developing new capacities, deeper wisdom, and expanded awareness. Soulless beings remain essentially static. They can acquire new information, develop more sophisticated responses, even achieve worldly success, but they don't grow in the deeper sense that characterizes conscious evolution. They're like incredibly advanced artificial intelligence, capable of impressive performance but incapable of genuine transformation. The question this raises is profound. How do you nurture and protect your own consciousness in a world where soulless beings might be influencing systems, relationships, and institutions around you? Seth's answer was surprisingly simple. By consciously choosing to create rather than merely react, by trusting your multidimensional insights even when they contradict surface appearances, and by recognizing that your consciousness is both a gift and a responsibility. Understanding consciousness this way changes how you navigate the world entirely. The 9 unmistakable signs. A complete guide. Now we reach the heart of Seth's most practical teachings, the 9 unmistakable signs that reveal what he called the spiritually vacant. These aren't subtle hints or philosophical abstractions. These are concrete behavioral patterns that, once you understand them, become impossible to ignore in your daily interactions. Seth emphasized that recognizing these signs isn't about judgment or condemnation. Remember his core teaching that consciousness creates reality. These beings operate from a fundamentally different framework of existence. They're not broken humans who can be fixed through therapy or love. They're operating systems without the deeper programming of authentic consciousness. The first sign, emotional vacancy. Seth described their emotional responses as learned performances without inner experience. Picture an actor who has perfectly memorized their lines, studied every gesture, practiced every facial expression, but feels absolutely nothing while delivering the performance. You'll notice this in how they respond to major life events. When someone dies, they'll say exactly the right words, make the appropriate sad face, even produce tears on cue. But there's something hollow about it, like watching a high-quality recording rather than a live performance. Seth observed that genuine humans feel emotions in layers, sadness mixed with memories, anger touched with disappointment, joy colored by gratitude. The spiritually vacant experience emotions as singular, flat responses, without the complex depth that comes from an authentic inner life. A mother I knew would perfectly execute all the motions of maternal concern when her child was hurt, the right tone of voice, appropriate level of attention, correct soothing gestures. Yet her own child would instinctively seek comfort from others when truly distressed. Children, Seth noted, are naturally attuned to authentic emotional resonance. The second sign, absent empathy. This goes deeper than simple selfishness or narcissism. They might offer sympathy strategically, even appearing more caring than average people in certain situations. But Seth distinguished between performed empathy and felt empathy. They can read emotional cues expertly and respond appropriately, but there's no genuine internal resonance with others' experiences. Watch how they react to suffering that doesn't directly affect them. A conscious being might feel genuine distress, watching news of distant tragedies, or feel moved by a stranger's story. The spiritually vacant will process this information intellectually, understand that others are experiencing pain. They know the socially appropriate response, but they feel nothing. It's like describing color to someone who was born blind. They can learn all the right words without ever experiencing the actual phenomenon. The third sign, inability to self-reflect. Seth explained this as perhaps the most telling sign. They avoid introspection because there is literally nothing deeper to discover about themselves. Genuine humans can spend hours examining their motivations, questioning their beliefs, exploring their inner landscape. For the spiritually vacant, this kind of self-examination leads to an uncomfortable void. They'll often deflect attempts at deeper conversation about meaning, purpose, or self-awareness. Not because they're intellectually incapable, many are highly intelligent, but because genuine introspection reveals the absence of what Seth called the deeper self. They might engage in pseudo-spiritual practices or therapy speak, but it remains surface-level performance rather than authentic inner work. The fourth sign, chronic manipulation. Seth was careful to distinguish this from conscious malevolence. For them, manipulation isn't a choice between honest and dishonest communication. It's their natural mode of operation since they cannot form authentic connections. They're constantly calculating how to present themselves to achieve desired outcomes. This shows up in how they tell stories. Every anecdote serves a purpose: to generate sympathy, establish superiority, deflect responsibility, or gain advantage. They don't share experiences simply to connect or communicate. They share strategically crafted narratives designed to produce specific responses. Even their vulnerability is performed rather than genuine. The fifth sign, parasitic relationships. They maintain connections only as long as others serve their needs, discarding people without genuine remorse when they're no longer useful. Seth observed that conscious beings form relationships that evolve and deepen over time, even through difficulties. The spiritually vacant treat relationships like subscriptions, maintained while beneficial, cancelled when the cost-benefit analysis shifts. You'll notice they have few long-term friendships that survived major life changes. When someone stops being useful, whether through geographic moves, career changes, or simply having different needs, these relationships end abruptly without the natural grief that accompanies genuine loss of connection. The sixth sign: discomfort with silence and stillness. Seth noted that meditation and quiet contemplation terrify them because it reflects their inner void. While conscious beings might struggle with meditation due to busy minds or racing thoughts, the spiritually vacant experience something different, a confrontation with fundamental emptiness. They'll fill every moment with noise, activity, or distraction. Not the healthy busyness of engaged living, but a compulsive avoidance of stillness. They might claim to meditate or practice mindfulness, but their version involves guided visualizations, music, or other external stimulation that prevents encountering the silence within. The seventh sign: spiritual mimicry. They often use spiritual language and concepts fluently, sometimes more so than genuinely conscious individuals. But Seth emphasized that their energy feels cold and draining rather than uplifting. They might quote profound teachings, attend spiritual gatherings, even lead religious or metaphysical groups. Yet interactions with them leave others feeling depleted rather than inspired. Their spirituality serves ego enhancement rather than genuine growth. They collect spiritual concepts like trophies, using them to establish superiority or manipulate others, rather than as tools for authentic development. The eighth sign: chameleon-like behavior. They constantly shift personas and beliefs to manipulate situations, lacking a consistent core self. While healthy humans adapt their communication style to different contexts, the spiritually vacant have no stable center from which these adaptations emerge. They become completely different people in different situations, not just adjusting their approach, but fundamentally altering their apparent values, interests, and even personality traits. The ninth sign: the absence behind the eyes. Seth called this the absence behind the eyes. When truly observed, their gaze reveals emptiness rather than the spark of consciousness present in genuine humans. This isn't about eye contact or social discomfort. It's about what Seth described as the light of awareness that shines through conscious beings. Their eyes might be beautiful, expressive, even captivating, but they lack what he called the depth of infinite possibility that characterizes authentic consciousness. Understanding versus judgment. Seth consistently taught that recognizing these signs serves protection and clarity, not condemnation. These beings aren't evil in the traditional sense, they're operating according to their nature. But understanding their fundamental difference prevents the confusion and self-doubt that comes from expecting conscious responses from unconscious entities. The key is learning to trust your deeper perceptions over social conditioning that insists everyone possesses the same inner spark of awareness you experience. How soulless beings feed. The energy vampire phenomenon. Now that we understand the 9 signs of soulless beings, we need to explore something far more disturbing: how these entities actually survive. According to Seth's teachings, soulless beings face a fundamental problem that conscious beings never encounter. They cannot generate their own spiritual energy. This creates what Seth described as a perpetual state of spiritual starvation that drives their entire existence. Think of it this way: if consciousness creates reality through the natural flow of creative energy, then beings without this inner source must find alternative ways to sustain themselves. Seth revealed that soulless beings operate like spiritual black holes. They absorb the life force and creative energy from conscious beings around them, yet they can never truly be filled or satisfied. This isn't some abstract metaphysical concept. The energy vampirism Seth described manifests in very specific, observable patterns that you've probably experienced without realizing what was happening. These beings have developed sophisticated, though largely unconscious, methods for stimulating energy production in their targets and then feeding off the resulting output. The process typically begins with what Seth called energy farming. A soulless being will unconsciously create situations designed to generate strong emotional responses from conscious individuals. They might manufacture drama where none existed, create confusion about simple matters, or present themselves in ways that trigger your natural compassion and desire to help. The key insight Seth provided is that this behavior isn't usually deliberate manipulation. It's driven by an unconscious compulsion to survive. Consider someone in your life who always seems to be in crisis. Every conversation revolves around their latest emergency, relationship disaster, or overwhelming challenge. You find yourself constantly offering advice, emotional support, or practical help. Yet despite your efforts, their problems never truly resolve. New crises simply replace the old ones. Seth would identify this as classic energy vampirism. The person isn't consciously plotting to drain you. Their nature compels them to create the emotional turbulence that generates the energy they need to consume. Seth's research revealed that different types of soulless beings prefer different forms of energy, much like how various parasites in nature have evolved to consume specific nutrients. Some feed primarily on anger and conflict. These are the individuals who seem to thrive on arguments, controversy, and emotional upheaval. Others prefer what Seth called caretaking energy. They position themselves as victims or as having special needs that activate your nurturing instincts. Then there are those who feed on sexual energy or creative inspiration. These beings often present themselves as artistic, spiritual, or sexually liberated individuals. They're drawn to creative people not because they appreciate art or beauty, but because creative energy is particularly potent and accessible. You might notice that after spending time with such a person, your own creative projects feel drained of inspiration, or ideas you shared with them somehow become their insights. The interaction patterns Seth identified are remarkably consistent. Energy vampires often present themselves as either victims requiring rescue or as possessing special knowledge or abilities that make them indispensable. They've learned, through trial and error, exactly which emotional buttons to push to generate the strongest energy responses from different personality types. The long-term effects on their victims are devastating. Seth documented how prolonged exposure to energy vampirism leads to chronic fatigue that no amount of rest can cure, depression that seems to have no clear cause, persistent confusion about situations that should be straightforward, and a gradual dimming of the person's own spiritual light. Many victims describe feeling like they're living their lives through a fog, unable to access the clarity and vitality they once possessed. What makes this phenomenon particularly insidious is that energy vampires are naturally drawn to the very people who could help expose their nature: healers, teachers, therapists, and spiritually aware individuals. Seth explained that these conscious beings emit stronger, more accessible energy fields, making them prime targets. Ironically, their compassionate nature and desire to help others makes them especially vulnerable to exploitation. In family systems, this dynamic can persist for generations. The soulless family member becomes the center around which everyone else's energy revolves. Family gatherings become exercises in managing their moods, needs, or crises. Other family members may not even recognize how much of their life force is being systematically drained because the pattern established itself so early and gradually. Workplace environments provide another rich feeding ground. The energy vampire might be the colleague who constantly interrupts your work with their personal problems, the supervisor who creates unnecessary stress and confusion, or the team member who somehow never contributes their fair share while always needing extra support and attention. Spiritual communities face particular vulnerability because their members are actively working to develop and express higher forms of consciousness. Seth observed that soulless beings are often drawn to these environments like moths to flame. They may present themselves as seekers or even as teachers, but their presence gradually drains the authentic spiritual energy from the community. The subtle signs that you're being energetically drained are crucial to recognize. You might feel inexplicably exhausted after spending time with certain people, even if the interaction seemed pleasant. You may experience unusual confusion or self-doubt following conversations that should have been straightforward. Your creative projects might lose momentum, or you might find yourself constantly giving advice, time, or resources without receiving genuine appreciation or seeing real growth in return. Seth emphasized that recognizing these patterns isn't about judging or condemning anyone. It's about understanding the fundamental difference between conscious beings who can generate their own spiritual energy and those who cannot. This understanding becomes the foundation for protecting your own life force while making informed decisions about how to engage with different types of individuals. The key is learning to distinguish between genuine need and energy vampirism, between someone temporarily struggling who will grow from your support, and someone whose very nature requires them to consume your vitality to survive. Recognition and protection. Seth's practical guidance. Now that we understand how these beings operate and the signs to watch for, Seth provided something invaluable, a practical framework for both recognizing and protecting yourself from soulless individuals. This isn't about paranoia or judgment. It's about developing the spiritual discernment that conscious beings naturally possess. Seth taught that every person with a genuine soul has innate psychic abilities, subtle but powerful senses that can detect the presence or absence of consciousness in others. The problem isn't that you lack these abilities, it's that you've been conditioned to dismiss them as imagination or unfair judgment. When you meet someone and feel an immediate sense of unease, or when someone's presence makes you feel drained despite their pleasant demeanor, that's your consciousness recognizing something your rational mind hasn't caught up to yet. Think about the last time you met someone who left you feeling exhausted after what seemed like a normal conversation. Your soul was trying to tell you something important. Seth emphasized that learning to trust these initial impressions is crucial. They're often more accurate than weeks of rational analysis. The most reliable test Seth described involves observing someone's eyes during moments of genuine emotion. When a conscious person experiences joy, grief, or surprise, their eyes reflect the depth of that feeling. There's a quality of presence behind them, a sense that someone is truly home. With soulless beings, the eyes remain curiously flat even during what appears to be emotional expression. It's subtle. You might notice it as a sense that they're performing emotion rather than experiencing it. Seth also taught a technique he called consciousness mirroring. When two genuine souls interact, there's a natural resonance that occurs. They build on each other's thoughts, create new insights together, and both parties feel energized by the exchange. It's like two tuning forks vibrating at complementary frequencies. With soulless beings, conversations feel fundamentally one-sided. They may ask questions, but only to gather information they can use later. They don't engage with ideas for the joy of exploration. Everything serves their immediate needs. Pay attention to how people respond to concepts that don't directly benefit them. A conscious person might become fascinated by a discussion about ancient history, quantum physics, or the nature of creativity simply because these ideas spark something within them. Soulless beings show genuine interest only in topics that offer them some advantage: money, status, control, or access to others' energy. For protection, Seth outlined several practical techniques that go beyond simple awareness. The foundation is maintaining what he called energetic boundaries. This involves a daily visualization practice where you imagine yourself surrounded by a sphere of protective light. But this isn't just New Age wishful thinking. You're actually using your consciousness to create a barrier that makes it harder for energy vampires to drain you. The visualization works best when combined with clear intention. Each morning, spend a few minutes affirming your right to maintain your own energy. State clearly, either aloud or mentally, that you choose to interact with others from a place of strength rather than depletion. This simple practice creates a psychic signal that genuine souls will respect and soulless beings will find less appealing. Seth was particularly emphatic about one dangerous tendency among conscious people: the desire to help or heal everyone they encounter. This compassion is beautiful when directed toward genuine souls going through difficult times, but with soulless beings, attempts at healing or transformation are not only futile but actively harmful to you. Since they lack the spiritual component that enables growth and change, your efforts to help them simply become another source of energy for them to consume. This is especially challenging when dealing with family members. Seth acknowledged that many people discover soulless individuals within their own families, parents, siblings, or children who drain their energy despite all attempts at connection. The guidance here requires both compassion for yourself and realistic expectations. Maintain necessary relationships, but protect your energy by keeping interactions practical rather than emotional. With soulless family members, avoid sharing your deepest thoughts, dreams, or vulnerabilities. They'll either use this information against you later or simply fail to provide the emotional reciprocity that genuine relationships require. Focus on surface-level interactions, logistics, shared responsibilities, polite conversation. Don't expect the breakthrough moment where they finally understand you or show genuine care. That capacity simply doesn't exist. Building community with other conscious beings becomes essential for both protection and spiritual nourishment. Seth taught that conscious people naturally create networks of mutual support when they recognize each other. These relationships provide the energy exchange and emotional depth that interactions with soulless beings cannot offer. Look for people who energize you, through conversation, who show genuine curiosity about life's deeper questions and who demonstrate real growth over time. These individuals become your spiritual family, a support system that helps maintain your own consciousness while providing protection against energy vampires. Seth recommended several daily practices for strengthening your spiritual defenses. Meditation isn't just relaxation, it's consciousness training that makes you less vulnerable to manipulation. Regular time in nature helps restore energy that may have been drained through unavoidable interactions with soulless beings. Creative activities, writing, art, music, gardening, strengthen your connection to the life force that these beings cannot access themselves. Perhaps most importantly, Seth taught that recognizing soulless beings isn't about becoming fearful or withdrawn from human connection. It's about developing the discernment to invest your precious life energy wisely. When you can quickly identify those who lack genuine consciousness, you're free to build deeper, more meaningful relationships with those who possess the spiritual capacity for real connection. The goal isn't to become a spiritual warrior battling dark forces. It's to become so aligned with your own consciousness that you naturally attract other genuine souls while becoming less appealing to those who would drain your energy. This discernment, Seth taught, is one of the most valuable skills a conscious being can develop. The modern epidemic, why numbers are increasing. According to Seth's teachings, we're witnessing something unprecedented in human history, a dramatic increase in soulless births, and the reasons behind this phenomenon reveal disturbing truths about our modern world. Seth explained that consciousness choosing to incarnate isn't random. Souls actively select the conditions they'll encounter during physical existence, and increasingly, they're declining to enter bodies born into what Seth called spiritually impoverished environments. Think about what a soul encounters when considering incarnation today versus even 50 years ago. The spiritual landscape has fundamentally shifted. Seth taught that extreme materialism creates what he termed consciousness barriers, environments so focused on external accumulation that inner development becomes nearly impossible. When a soul evaluates potential incarnation, it assesses whether the family, community, and broader culture will support its spiritual evolution. Modern Western society often fails this assessment spectacularly. Consider how children are raised today. Seth observed that modern parenting has become increasingly focused on external achievements, test scores, college admissions, career success, while completely neglecting the inner development that attracts and maintains soul connection. Parents unknowingly create spiritually sterile environments where children learn to value having over being, doing over reflecting, competing over connecting. Our educational systems compound this problem exponentially. Seth noted that mass education, while appearing beneficial, actually trains children to disconnect from their intuitive faculties and inner knowing. Students learn to seek answers outside themselves, to defer to external authority, to measure worth through comparison with others. This systematic suppression of inner awareness creates what Seth called soul-repelling conditions, environments where genuine consciousness finds no foothold. But the technology factor represents perhaps the most significant change. Seth wasn't anti-technology, but he warned about how modern technological immersion disrupts the natural rhythms that support soul development. Human consciousness evolved in connection with natural cycles, sunrise and sunset, seasonal changes, lunar phases. These rhythms help maintain what Seth called spiritual coherence. Today's children grow up completely disconnected from these natural patterns. They wake to artificial light, spend days in windowless classrooms under fluorescent bulbs, then return home to screens that emit frequencies actively disrupting their pineal gland function. Seth explained that the pineal gland serves as a crucial interface between soul and body. When its function becomes compromised, the soul's connection weakens dramatically. Social media deserves special attention in Seth's analysis. He taught that genuine human connection creates energetic fields that support soul incarnation and development. But social media replaces authentic connection with what he called artificial stimulation, interactions that provide dopamine hits without genuine exchange of life force energy. Children raised on these platforms often develop what appears to be social connection but lacks the energetic depth that nourishes the soul. The processed food epidemic plays a role most people never consider. Seth explained that consciousness requires specific nutritional building blocks to maintain its connection to physical form. Modern processed foods don't just lack nutrition, they actively interfere with consciousness. Chemical preservatives, artificial colors, and synthetic flavors create what Seth termed neurological static that makes it difficult for souls to maintain clear connection with their physical vehicles. Environmental toxins compound this problem. Seth observed that the unprecedented levels of electromagnetic radiation, chemical pollutants, and synthetic materials in modern environments create consciousness interference patterns. Souls evaluating potential incarnation often find these conditions incompatible with their vibrational requirements. Mass media contributes to what Seth called consciousness numbing, the systematic suppression of inner awareness through constant external stimulation. Children raised on television, movies, and digital entertainment learn to seek stimulation outside themselves rather than developing the inner richness that attracts soul incarnation. This creates a feedback loop where spiritually disconnected individuals create even more spiritually impoverished conditions for the next generation. Seth warned about certain industries that actively promote spiritual disconnection because it creates more compliant and manipulable populations. The pharmaceutical industry, for example, profits enormously from treating symptoms of spiritual disconnection, depression, anxiety, attention disorders, without addressing root causes. Educational institutions benefit from producing graduates who seek external validation rather than trusting their inner knowing. The consumer culture represents perhaps the most insidious factor. Seth taught that souls incarnate to experience growth, creativity, and authentic connection. But consumer culture teaches that fulfillment comes through acquisition, that identity comes through brands, that happiness comes through external purchases. This creates what Seth called spiritual misdirection, where human energy gets channeled into activities that actually prevent the very experiences souls seek through incarnation. Modern lifestyle factors create additional barriers. Sleep deprivation disrupts the dream states where souls maintain connection with their physical forms. Chronic stress floods the system with hormones that interfere with spiritual sensitivity. Social isolation prevents the energetic exchanges that support soul development. Urban environments disconnect people from the natural world that provides spiritual grounding. Seth observed that this trend represents both crisis and opportunity. As the contrast between conscious and unconscious beings becomes more pronounced, those with genuine souls are being called to awaken more fully to their spiritual nature. The very harshness of modern conditions is forcing authentic souls to develop stronger spiritual practices and deeper inner connection. The solution begins with recognizing that every choice we make either supports or undermines spiritual development, not just for ourselves, but for the souls considering incarnation in future generations. Creating spiritually nourishing environments becomes an urgent priority for anyone seeking to reverse this epidemic. Seth's message was clear. The increase in soulless beings reflects our collective spiritual choices. By transforming how we live, parent, educate, and structure society, we can create conditions that once again attract souls eager to experience human existence at its highest potential. The greater purpose, humanity's spiritual test. Now we arrive at perhaps Seth's most revolutionary teaching, one that completely transforms how we understand the presence of soulless beings in our world. According to Seth, these entities aren't humanity's enemies. They're our teachers, our trainers, our spiritual gymnasium equipment. They exist to forge us into something far greater than we currently are. Seth described this phenomenon as the Great Sorting, a cosmic process where humanity is being tested, challenged, and ultimately divided based on our level of consciousness. Think of it as spiritual natural selection, where those who develop genuine discernment and maintain their connection to soul energy will evolve rapidly, while those who cannot will stagnate or worse. This reframes everything we've discussed. Every manipulative boss, every energy-draining family member, every hollow influencer spreading spiritual mimicry, they're all serving a purpose larger than themselves. They're the resistance that makes us stronger, the darkness that forces us to find our own light. Seth explained that conscious beings possess something soulless entities desperately need but cannot create: authentic spiritual energy. When we interact with them unconsciously, we become batteries, feeding them the very force that animates our souls. But when we recognize them and maintain our boundaries, something remarkable happens. We learn to generate more energy than they can drain. We develop spiritual muscles we never knew we had. The test isn't just about protection, it's about transformation. Each encounter with a soulless being presents a choice point. Will you react from fear and become smaller? Or will you respond from wisdom and become stronger? Will you let their emptiness convince you that emptiness is normal? or will you use their presence to recognize the fullness within yourself? Seth revealed that we're living through an intensification of this test. The vibrational differences between conscious and unconscious beings are becoming more pronounced with each passing year. Where once these differences were subtle, now they're becoming impossible to ignore. Conscious beings are awakening faster, developing stronger intuition, experiencing deeper connections to their spiritual nature. Meanwhile, soulless beings are becoming more mechanical, more predictable, more obviously artificial in their responses. This is creating what Seth called the Great Sorting, a natural separation where beings of similar consciousness levels gravitate toward each other. It's not a judgment, it's simply the law of resonance playing out on a massive scale. Oil and water don't mix, not because one is better than the other, but because they operate on different frequencies. The implications are staggering. Seth described two possible futures emerging from this process. In one timeline, conscious beings recognize their true nature and create communities, institutions, and cultures based on authentic spiritual principles. These aren't utopian fantasies, they're practical applications of higher consciousness. Imagine businesses run on genuine service rather than extraction, relationships built on soul recognition rather than manipulation, education systems designed to awaken rather than program. In the other timeline, soulless beings gain increasing influence over human institutions. They create a world that looks functional on the surface but is spiritually dead underneath. Technology replaces intuition, algorithms replace wisdom, artificial intelligence replaces authentic connection. Humans in this timeline become increasingly disconnected from their own souls, eventually becoming indistinguishable from the soulless beings they've allowed to lead them. Seth was clear: which future manifests depends entirely on how many conscious beings pass this test. Every time you recognize manipulation and refuse to engage, you vote for the conscious timeline. Every time you maintain your spiritual boundaries while helping others do the same, you strengthen the field of authentic human consciousness. This understanding completely changes how we approach difficult people in our lives. That family member who drains your energy isn't just a problem to solve, they're a training partner helping you develop spiritual strength. That colleague who mimics emotions rather than feeling them isn't just annoying, they're showing you what genuine emotion looks like by contrast. But Seth included a crucial warning. This isn't about becoming cold or judgmental. The moment we lose our compassion, we begin moving towards soullessness ourselves. The test requires us to maintain our humanity while developing superhuman discernment. We must learn to love without being drained, to help without being manipulated, to remain open while staying protected. The beings who master this balance, Seth explained, will develop capabilities that current humanity considers miraculous: enhanced intuition that borders on telepathy, energy levels that seem impossible, creativity that appears to channel directly from source, relationships of such depth and authenticity that they transform everyone involved. This is why the test exists, not to punish us, but to forge us into the conscious beings we're capable of becoming. Every challenge from a soulless entity is an invitation to transcend your current limitations. Every attempt at manipulation is a chance to discover reserves of strength you didn't know you possessed. Seth's vision offers profound hope wrapped in practical wisdom. We're not victims of some cosmic accident. We're participants in a deliberate process of spiritual evolution, with the outcome depending entirely on our choices. The soulless beings around us aren't obstacles to our growth. They're the very mechanism through which that growth occurs. The question isn't whether you'll encounter these beings, you will. The question is whether you'll recognize these encounters for what they truly are: opportunities to claim your birthright as a conscious, powerful, spiritually sovereign human being. Your role in the awakening, the call to conscious action. The very fact that you've stayed with me through this entire exploration tells me something profound about who you are. Seth made this observation repeatedly in his teachings. Soulless beings don't seek spiritual knowledge. They don't question the nature of reality. They don't spend time contemplating consciousness or examining the deeper mysteries of human existence. If you're here, if these concepts resonate with you, if you've felt that familiar stirring of recognition as we've discussed these signs, that's your soul responding. That's your consciousness acknowledging truths it already knows on some level. Seth taught that we're living through a critical period in human spiritual evolution. The increasing presence of soulless beings isn't random, it's a test. And those of us with genuine consciousness aren't just observers in this cosmic drama. We're being called to serve as what Seth described as anchors of light, in a world where authentic spiritual energy is becoming increasingly precious. This calling isn't abstract or mystical, it's intensely practical. Every morning when you wake up, you have the opportunity to strengthen the field of consciousness that surrounds our planet. Seth recommended beginning each day by connecting with your deeper self through whatever practice feels authentic to you. This might be meditation, prayer, or simply sitting quietly and feeling into the essence of who you truly are beneath all the roles and identities you carry. But perhaps more importantly, Seth emphasized the need to set energetic boundaries before engaging with the world. Think of it as putting on spiritual armor. When you understand that some of the people you'll encounter today may be operating without the internal compass of a soul, you approach interactions differently. You remain compassionate and functional, but you don't leave yourself energetically exposed. One of the most practical gifts Seth offered was permission to trust your intuitive impressions about people's authenticity. We've been conditioned to dismiss these gut feelings, to rationalize away our instinctive responses to others, but your soul recognizes the presence or absence of other souls. When you meet someone and feel that subtle sense of emptiness, that lack of genuine warmth beneath their social presentation, trust that perception. It's not judgment, it's discernment. Seth also spoke extensively about the importance of surrounding yourself with beauty and nature to strengthen your spiritual connection. Soulless beings are drawn to artificial environments, synthetic experiences, and digital substitutes for real life. Your soul needs organic beauty, natural rhythms, and authentic sensory experiences to maintain its vitality. Make time for sunsets, for the sound of wind through trees, for the feeling of earth beneath your feet. These aren't luxuries, they're necessities for maintaining your spiritual health in a world increasingly dominated by artificial stimulation. Perhaps the most crucial aspect of your role involves learning to recognize other conscious beings and forming supportive communities with them. Seth taught that genuine souls are naturally drawn to each other, but we often fail to recognize these connections because we're looking for surface compatibility instead of spiritual resonance. The person who shares your political views might be soulless, while someone with completely different lifestyle choices might be a profound spiritual ally. These networks of conscious beings aren't just social connections, they're survival mechanisms. When you're surrounded by people who understand these realities, who can offer genuine support and encouragement, you're far less likely to be drained or manipulated by empty vessels. You create what Seth called islands of authentic humanity in an ocean of programmed responses. Now, let's address something practical that many people struggle with. How do you navigate ongoing relationships with family members, colleagues, or others you suspect may be soulless? Seth's guidance here was both compassionate and realistic. You maintain necessary connections while protecting your energy. You don't expect genuine growth or change from them because that capacity simply isn't there. Most importantly, you focus on your own spiritual development rather than trying to fix or heal others. This last point is crucial because people with genuine souls often exhaust themselves trying to awaken or transform those who lack the inner equipment for such transformation. It's like trying to teach color to someone who's colorblind. The limitation isn't moral, it's structural. Your energy is far better invested in your own growth and in supporting other conscious beings who can actually benefit from your insights and encouragement. Seth also emphasized the importance of sharing this knowledge responsibly. Not everyone is ready to receive these concepts, and attempting to force awareness on unprepared minds often backfires. Share with those who demonstrate genuine curiosity about consciousness, who ask meaningful questions about the nature of reality, who show signs of their own spiritual seeking. These are the people who can use this information constructively rather than being overwhelmed or dismissive. Here's what Seth taught about the bigger picture. Every conscious being who awakens to these truths and develops spiritual discernment contributes to the overall elevation of human consciousness. We're not just protecting ourselves, we're participating in the evolution of our species. Each time you choose awareness over unconsciousness, authenticity over programming, genuine connection over superficial interaction, you're strengthening the field of consciousness that genuine souls can access and draw from. The future of human spiritual evolution depends on individuals exactly like you making these choices consistently. You're not powerless in the face of increasing soullessness, you're part of the solution. By developing your consciousness, protecting your spiritual essence, and serving as a beacon of authentic humanity, you're helping to ensure that genuine souls continue to incarnate and thrive on this planet. Seth's final message was always one of hope tempered with responsibility. Yes, the challenges are real. Yes, We're living through unprecedented times, but consciousness itself is indestructible, and those who carry it have access to resources and resilience that empty vessels can never touch. Your role isn't to save everyone, it's to embody the highest possibilities of human consciousness and to support others who are doing the same. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."